I wanted to kind of reach out to some sports minds and some business minds to talk about and get a little bit better context around what it takes to bring a professional franchise here to Utah, whether it's through expansion or relocation. So just from, kind of a broad level, what would you say it does take to bring a professional sports team here to Utah?
I think, and this is by no means my area of expertise, but based on what I know, the two things that the owners, the other 32 owners of the NHL who are going to make this decision, what they're thinking about is what is the long-term prosperity of the franchise in that particular city, and what is the basically added value to potential TV partners. And I don't know if the location matters as much on that part, but the TV partner part will be a factor for do we expand or not.
So you really think it kind of comes down to the dollars and cents for the other owners. Does it make sense sort of financially, because this is going to be a new ownership partner, correct? He's going to be part of new owners. And does that piece of the puzzle make sense financially for the rest of the owners? That's interesting. I didn't think about that.
Right. So you think about whatever the total revenue is for the league. If they add two more teams, they have to divide it by 34 instead of 32 now. So that's going to be a big deal. And the other thing, and this will be really important on Salt Lake's end, is the expansion fee. The Seattle Kraken expansion fee was $650 million. The Golden Knights, I think, was $450 million or something like that. They're talking for a new expansion, it may be in the billions for an expansion fee. So again, that's going to be decided by the owners. But I would imagine will play a critical factor.
So if you're Ryan Smith in his ownership group right now, do you think like he's got a very compelling case?
Yes and no. I think the yes is the population growth is going to be a critical factor in that pitch. I think the potential of not just the 32 Winter Olympics, but I have a feeling the Olympics are going to end up getting into a rotation type model with their hosts anyway, because a lot less cities are involved or want to be involved. And so it could be a situation where Salt Lake is now hosting the Winter Olympics every 8 years or 12 years or something along those lines. That could be really compelling. The interest that will draw to the city could then kind of augment the attention that a new hockey team would get. The downside is the population of Salt Lake is still relatively small. In the NBA, the Salt Lake is the smallest population, or excuse me, Salt Lake's the smallest NBA population city, and it would be in the NHL as well, depending on who they added. And trying to figure out, well, is this a long-term sustainable, how do I put this? Long-term sustainable in terms of public support, because eventually what will happen is, as we're seeing across the country, right now Salt Lake's pitching the A's to maybe play here for a couple of years. Well, why are the A's leaving? Because they couldn't get a deal with Oakland to help build a new stadium. And so the owners will look at that and say, well, what happens when it's time for a new arena way down the road? Will this place support it? So that type of thing. So the other thing I guess I would look at if I were the NHL is, well, how are the Grizzlies doing? What's the support for the Grizzlies? That should be some evidence. Obviously, the Jazz will provide a lot of evidence. So I think the pros probably, in my opinion, outweigh the cons. But what we don't know is who else is competing, what other cities are competing. And until you know that, it's a little bit harder to try to figure out, well, do we have the most compelling case or the third most compelling case?
Sure. I wonder what your take is on why these billionaires are wanting to park their money in these professional sports franchises. What's your take on that?
Oh, it's a guaranteed exponential growth in your investment. I just read today when the Smiths bought the Jazz, they bought them for, I think, $1.66 billion. They're already valued at $3.2 billion. That's in 2 years. So, if you invest in a sports franchise, one of the major four, I just saw the MLS, I think the average, I don't know if it's the average, but their valuations are going up. I haven't seen a professional franchise get sold for less than what it was bought for in recent history. And so it's a guarantee that you're going to make a lot of money. The other thing is it's a really, really exclusive club. There's only 32 owners in the NHL, in the NFL, 30 in the NBA. And so there are not very many people could say they own a team. And so I think that's a big draw as well.
And I feel like I'm starting to see more of these owners own teams in different leagues. You know, they own an NHL team, they've got an NFL team, you know, and is that just me, or am I starting to see that more and more? They know what you just said, and they're scarfing them all up.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, we see value across leagues for these owners. They say, well, if I can do it in the NFL, then I can make a lot of money in the NBA or what have you. But it's also on the flip side for the owners when they're deciding, well, should we basically when they're vetting ownership, if we know you've been a successful NFL owner, well, we're pretty sure you can do it in the NBA as well. So it makes it a little bit easier to get your foot in the door once you've already purchased a franchise in another league.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So on that same sort of note right there, if we don't get a team this time around during this attempt, does it hurt us in any way if we try to do it sometime down the road?
No, I don't think it would hurt. I think in fact it probably makes it a little bit easier depending on what the time frame is. Because if you make a pitch this year, it doesn't work out, but 5 years from now, a lot of the same owners are still in the league, still making that decision, and they thought your case to begin with was worthwhile, then it might in fact help because they'll know better what your pitch is, and then maybe it gives you a chance to improve on the things they didn't like the first time around. But it's really hard to say. It really just depends on the timing of it. The challenge in that is these leagues don't expand very often, and so if it doesn't happen this time, you're probably waiting quite a while until the next time, depending on how they do it.
And when you talk about being an exclusive club, since Ryan Smith already is an owner of a professional sports franchise, do we think that helps him in any way from these other NHL owners can look at him and say, well, he's already got one franchise under his belt and he's doing a pretty good job with it. Do you think that helps him in his bid?
I do think that helps. I think the other thing that helps is the kind of synergy between having a basketball tenant and a hockey tenant in the same building, knowing that the owner of the basketball team is also the owner of the hockey team, will ensure that the facility will be to the standards that the NHL is looking for, and the NBA, depending on if it's a new arena and those type of things. But that kind of known quantity, knowing how he interacts in that space. They've got 29 or more, because there's multiple owners, but they can go to all the NBA owners and say, how is this person doing? How do they manage? All those type of things. So I think that would be a real benefit.
If you had to place a bet on, let's assume we're going to get a team. You had to place a bet on when the first puck's going to drop. What would you say?
Ooh. Oh, man, that's a really good question. I would be surprised if it happens sooner than 4 years from now.
Okay.
Based on the history of the NHL recently and just how long these things take, but that is a complete guess on my part.
Sure, absolutely. And I assume that's probably expansion, not relocation. As I understand it, relocation could probably happen a little quicker. If it's expansion, probably a little bit longer.
Right.
Okay. One other thought I wanted to ask you about, we talked about the billionaires getting theirs when they buy these teams. Can that trickle down, or can there be a risk to the city, to the state, taxpayer dollars if it's not done right?
And that's one of the biggest challenges when it comes to these things. It really the biggest burden on taxpayers will be potentially the involvement of public financing if there's a new building built. And so the question then becomes, well, what's the public's involvement in making that decision? And if they're not involved, how much of a burden is placed on them? what ends up happening is there's a value to cities in being recognized as a professional sports city. And the owners know this and they take advantage of it. Again, we saw why the Raiders are in Vegas, why the A's are moving to Vegas, why the Jazz are in Utah to begin with, right? So there could definitely be a burden on the taxpayers. The perfect example of this, if you want to look this up, is what happened in St. Louis with the Rams. So the Rams went to St. Louis after being in LA, and they decided to leave. Now and after the city of St. Louis had invested a lot of money in the Edward Jones Dome. I don't know what it's called now, but so there's scenarios like that where the public is now shouldering a burden and no longer getting a benefit because the team could potentially leave depending on the structure of the lease agreements and all those type of things. But the flip side is, and the argument for this is economic development. If you're adding in, with a hockey team, 41 regular season events and postseason potential and preseason, there is, and then the synergy with having a basketball team as well, that could create a lot of economic activity in an area, depending on where they put the arena, whether it's the Delta Center or somewhere else. And so that's a potential benefit to the local economy, and maybe as it trickles out. Those are where you got to get a very well done economic analysis to see, does the pros outweigh the cons?
Yeah, we talk about the initial investment into the Jazz that he put up. How critical is it, do you think, for him to make that back, or has he already?
In theory, he has already. I mean, if he sold the team today, he would likely get $3 or $4 billion for the franchise because it's so coveted, and there's just not that many opportunities to do it. And so I'd have to look and see, but Mark Cuban just sold his majority stake in the Mavericks for billions and billions of dollars. The Suns recently sold, I think, for $4.5 billion. So it's likely he's already made his money back and much, much, much more. So we don't have to throw a party for Ryan Smith.
Yeah. James, thanks so much for your time and your thoughts on this. Really interesting stuff. Appreciate it.